Hello everyone, and welcome into my journey to the 3D Zelda challenge. Now, as per the Ocarina of Time Ganon source requirement video, this will be divided in 3 sections. A breakdown of the run as a whole, learning resources as well as help on certain sections that I feel are worth mentioning, and finally, the marathon safety of the run. Something I want to add, however, before all the sections is a little context of the speedrun in terms of where it is now, where it came from, and where it may be headed, if it can be said, etc. So let's start with the context of Skyward Sword any percent. First off, the run is run with a hero mode that you unlock after finishing the game a first time. This is because not only can cutscenes be skipped in this mode, but we'll also get double damage on this, which while it can be a double-edged sword, is definitely useful for the purpose of this speedrun. One such risk with this is a lack of hearts in the overworld, but definitely it is manageable. All of this means that to play the category, you must set up a file specifically using an SD card. Luckily though, all of this can be found in the Skyward Sword speedrunning Discord along with installation instructions. Up until last year, Skyward Sword was one of the longest 3D Zelda games to speedrun. That was because there were a lack of major sequence breaks. The go-to glitch that was used and still is to this day was the back in time, or bit in short, that allowed various actions to be done, such as bit warping and bit saving. However, despite what runners could do, no viable major sequence breaks were found. This all changed at the discovery of reverse bit magic, or RBMs in short, in 2019. This is a glitch that allowed runners to write both scene flags and story flags that shouldn't be set at that moment into the file, which allows for instance skipping having to collect the keys to open the door to the Earth Temple by using an RBM to set the flag, so the game therefore leaves it open for us to go through. As you may therefore understand, this can lead into major sequence breaks. Hence why Skyward Sword 80% went from being around 5 hours to a measly 2 in comparison, almost. Now, in what ways does this glitch break the game? Well, this is what we will see with the next section, the breakdown of the run as a whole. I will be basing myself off the safe route, which can be found at the Skyward Sword Discord as well as the ESA. It is also to note that recently there's been a few route changes in the main new route. However, this route that I will be using as reference here is definitely still viable for beginners and for marathon safe run as well. You can remain updated by just going on the Skyward Sword Discord. So, although this may be subject to change, let's go ahead. The run starts off with Link waking up in his room in the Night Academy in Skyloft, just as per the casual game. We then rush out the academy and proceed to go to the goddess statue to talk to Zelda. We skip the cutscene and then proceed to save at the statue on the lower academy part of Skyloft. This is important to set up for the back in time that is just about to be done by jumping off a few times from that cliff. Then get into back in time and perform the goddess sword RBM that will basically give us the sword early. Once that is done, we then have to go save the Loft Wing and go through the flying tutorial. We fly, and then the game puts us at the save prompt. Save and quit, and then go to a file that was corrupted in the previous back in time to then die instantly, and therefore get to the next one, where this time we perform an RBM on the training sword. When we load back into file 1, we then go to the goddess statue, open up Farron, and after skipping a bunch of cutscenes, we go to Farron. From now until we get to the slingshot, the run remains fairly close to how you would play casually, other than the fact that we just optimize the movement, such as for instance with the jumps into the valley that are calculated to protect Link's health, and general optimizations while searching for the key queens. Once the slingshot is obtained, we then proceed to go into the deeper area of the forest where Skyward is located. We can then perform an extending blow or cube warp if that fails. I will talk about that later. We then proceed to enter Skyward Temple, and we then save on the bird statue and then use the keys to kill ourselves. This time around to perform a glitch called Back in Time Warp, or Bit Warp in short. This then allows us to load back into file 1 but all the way at the end of the dungeon. I will come back to how this glitch and a variation of it called the Reverse BitWarp work in the next section. Once the BitWarp is done, we then proceed to kill the monster, break some bolts in order to set some flags, and then go get the beetle after beating the Stalfos. Once that is done, collect that rupee to set a flag, we save at that statue and then you guessed it, die and get into back in time, where we perform an RBM which allows us to skip the entirety of the Ghirahim boss fight. Once that is done, we then save and quit and reload it to a save that we copied before the boss fight to die, and once again get into back in time, where we start performing another RBM to activate the Elden Pillar on file 2, which is a setup for later in the run. We then come back to file 1 and unlock Elden a second time, but on that file instead for now. We then jump there and the usual drill happens. Save, die, back in time, and this time we do another bit warp to basically skip a part of Elden. We then get into the cave, kill some enemies to obtain the digging mitts. After all that, we get out and perform yet another RBM, which will unlock the door to the Earth Temple, to which we immediately rush to once that RBM is done. After that, we rush to go get bombs, and after that, perform another RBM that allows us to skip pretty much most of the dungeon by raising the bridge to the last section of the dungeon. Not only that, but it also allows early access to Thunderhead, which is very useful for later in the run. We go up, get the boss key, and then enter to kill Skuldera. That is, by the way, the most annoying boss of all time. After that, we get out, obtain the tablet, fly away to Thunderhead, that got unlocked thanks to the earlier RBM. We arrive at the Tower Island, open the passage, and then proceed to learn the song Fairest Courage. And then roll the drill, you save, die, and get back in time again, where this time we open up Lanayru during back in time, and then fly after loading up the game, and here we are, in the mostly featured region of this entire speedrun. Now we perform yet another RBM, and after doing it and committing it, we fly off, come back, and oh, surprise, the bird statue to the Temple of Time is activated. We land there, come in the dungeon, exit it, and boom, free Goddess Harp. We save, then die, and perform another RBM. Once we are back in time in Skyloft, we then proceed to do what is called a Farron back in time, which requires us to get to the sky using File 2, which in this route is the only file with which the game won't crash if you try that. And then, tada, the Elden Pillar. We then fly over to it to then get to Farron. Yes, that sentence is correct. After all, according to File 2, with which we access the sky, we never actually went to the surface, so due to it being quote-unquote the first time we go to a pillar, the game therefore brings us to the first one, being Farron. Either way, we'll land and then perform a bunch of shenanigans in order to perform an RBM that we call a Ballad of the Goddess skip, which is when the Door of Time usually pops up in its dormant state in the game. After that, we do another back in time, and this time we will do what is called the Song of the Hero skip. It is an RBM that is vital to get, and I will definitely explain more on how you get it and what you need to be wary of in the later sections of the video. However, just to give a little idea on why it is vital, it is because this RBM is what unlocks the door to the past version of the Sealed Valley after accessing the past, which allows us to reach the endgame early, therefore meaning there is no need to go through the whole last third of the game. Once that RBM is done, we are pretty much halfway through the run. The next thing we need to do is go over to Farron and go do the Farron trial since it was activated when we got the song earlier in the run. We do it, and once it is done and have the Water Dragon scale, we then perform another back in time. Once it is done, we go to Eldin and perform another back in time, and then perform another RBM with our dear old friend Batro. If done correctly, this will therefore activate the Eldin trial, which we can therefore quickly do, therefore giving us the Fire Shield earrings. Once that is done, we go towards the center of the volcano area, save at the statue there to perform the first RBM, which we then commit by going out and coming back in again. We then perform what has to be one of the most intricate back in time sections of the run, and the next RBM involves going to Farron, going back to the sky, skydiving to Lumpy Pumpkin, since there is an invisible wall that prevents the Loftwing from just flying there, going in, making it night by sleeping, going back out, and then performing the RBM of the Gratitude Crystal that is sitting in the shed there. We then go to the fountain there and bonk on it to commit the RBM, grab some water, and then proceed to run towards the entrance of the Fire Sanctuary. You may use the water you just grabbed to turn off the first fire, but then you will notice that, yay, the one that blocks the actual temple isn't there, thanks to the power of RBMs. Due to that, we can just enter the Fire Sanctuary with no troubles. We are now entering into the section that I like to call the RBM Sanctuary, because we are about to do a lot of them in this part of the run. When initially entering the dungeon, we first save and then die to perform the first back in time, while we can perform the first RBM with the bird statue. We then are back into the Fire Sanctuary and commit the RBM. Once that is done, same thing all over again, but with a different statue this time around. Then this time, we shoot the head of the statue to commit the RBM. And then we'll restart yet again, but this time around we go into night and get an RBM for the Gratitude Crystal that is there. Once done, we go and pick up the fairy that is in this hole right there and come back. And then, this is where the fun begins, the Reverse BitWarp. To give a very insultingly basic idea of what is happening, well, we first off need to save with the bird statue with Link well positioned on a very precise spot. That positioning is done by doing a certain setup. Assuming you have the right positioning, you then save on the bird statue and then proceed to go into back in time. Go to Farron, go into the actual forest, go to Flare Waterfall, where you can then use the Water Dragon scale to enter the ancient cistern. However, as you enter, you reload your file at a certain timing as it loads, so that Link will load into the wrong coordinates, which actually depend on Link's coordinates while saving at the Fire Sanctuary. And if done well, he will land into the poison, in which case he will get revived by the fairy and you can then get to the land quickly. I will cover this later. For now, let's move on to the next thing, which consists in just opening the chest right in front of us containing the key to the boss door for the ancient cistern. We then get out of the hole to let the statue not crush us. Go in, then back out again, and then perform a high flip to then skip all the way to the climbing rope. We then navigate around the dungeon to obtain a small key. We then get inside the statue through that door and then perform a bit of a scary jump in order to then open this door with the key we just obtained, all to help getting the whip. Afterwards, we open those valves to reach all the way to the top, where we use the pass key we acquired after the reverse BitWarp to access Koloktos. I've got some things to say about this boss that I will come back to later. After that fight, we grab Pharaoh's Flame and then proceed to fly over to Elden. Due to all the RBMs we have done during the RBM Sanctuary, the Fire Sanctuary, you will notice that the bird statue that is right in front of the boss door of that dungeon will be activated. So, just land at this area. Then, save, get in back in time and perform a bird statue RBM. We then go grab a fairy from this spot and then go get the boss key that can be obtained just by walking into the room without any need to do the puzzle. Once that is done, we go back to the door, open it and proceed to fight Ghirahim. Once done, we go get Din's Flame, after which we can then save on the prompt and die again to do what is the final back in time section of the run. This time around, the goal of this RBM is to activate the second fight for the Imprisoned. We go to Farron, bit save there, then go into the temple to perform it. Yes, as you may guess, there are some details I will talk about later. And now into the Imprisoned to fight. Complete it, and then come back to the temple. You can now open the door of time and enter the past. You can then go talk to Zelda to receive the true Master Sword, and then once done, you may open the door to the Sealed Valley, which only works due to the Song of the Hero skip that we performed at the halfway point of the run. We go through the Horde and also can attempt to do Horde skip, allowing us to skip a good portion of it. Once we reach all the way down, you kill all the Bokos, which should therefore initiate the boss battle with Ghirahim. And once that is done, we go into the portal and annihilate Demise. Phew, quite a run, isn't it? And as you may have understood by now, we will need to go through a lot, but this will be worth it if you ever get interested in doing that category yourself. And that is why I want to help you by pointing out not just to the best resources you should use, but also myself provide some help on some of the tough sections of this run. For the best help, I will just remind that there is a table of contents in the description, so you may go directly to the sections that may be of help to you. Without further ado, let's get to it. There are many things we need to go through, so let's go one by one on the elements that were discussed in this moment. First off, let's go on an explanation of the glitches and tricks used in this run, as going into this category without at least a basic understanding of what is happening will definitely make things harder. The entirety of this run is based on the back in time glitch. This is achieved by resetting the console at the same time as you press continue on the game over screen. See, when you press continue, the game wants to put Link back into the map so that you may keep playing just as you were doing. However, resetting the console should be sending you back at the title screen. Since you do these actions at the same time, the result is that you end up being able to play in the title screen, which is a particular layer for the Skyloft map. Due to this means you can manipulate the save files at the same time as you play, which can allow for certain actions. On the basic level, the actions you can do in back in time only affect what is happening in back in time state in itself. For example, picking up an item with the obtain animation for the first time with a file open will give you the inventory of that file into the back in time session that you are currently in, and bonking onto trees with a file open will open the academic doors when you have that one file open. Those are just simple examples of things that you can do in back in time. However, luckily enough, there is more that you can do that can affect the actual files in useful ways for speedrunning. This mainly includes reverse bit magic, RBMs in short. I would definitely recommend you check out the video made by Gymnast86 where he explains quite well how that works, and as a whole I would definitely recommend many of the videos he made on the topic, of which I will give links in the description below. But to give a basic explanation, it relies on changing the scene flags on the file so things can change when you leave back in time, which can allow skipping many things. An example among many being, for instance, obtaining the Goddess Sword early, or activating bird statues early so we can access certain areas earlier, allowing for huge skips. That whole glitch relies mainly on performing an action in back in time that changes the flags on the file, which can include, for instance, pushing that gravestone or finishing the last text box for obtaining the training sword, for instance. Where it is tricky is that normally, when pressing start the file, the game does some kind of sanity check, basically, and resets the flags to how they should be. However, if you start the file and then perform the action as it is loading, it means that the flag is set after that sanity check, meaning that when you arrive back into the file and you have committed the RBM, the change should be applied. If you want more technical details, you may of course check out Jimna's video as said earlier, but hopefully this definitely may help a bit in understanding what is happening during a lot of this run. Because if you don't, this may give new potential runners quite a lot of trouble in getting started. Other uses for back in time include the BitWarp or the Reverse BitWarp, which I will explain when we get to the moments I wanted to talk about with them. Either way, let's get through with this. Something I mentioned at the beginning of the video is the use of either the Extending Blow or Cube Warp within the Deep Woods in order to skip most of that and reach Skyward Temple. To explain them just a bit more, Extending Blow is when Link performs a final blow on an enemy that the game already considers to be dead, which is well impossible, so instead it launches Link to the origin coordinates of the map, which in this case will be in front of Skyward Temple. Usually to do that, the state of the Boko that is used for this one is that it is above the void when it happens, in which case the game thinks that the Bokoblin should be dead at this point, but yet still will allow Link to perform an extended blow. What I definitely would recommend is checking out the tutorial I made some time ago about it, which should explain it more. If that doesn't work out, then the backup is to use a Cube Warp, which means distracting this Boko into a good position so Link is positioned in front of the Goddess Cube that is there. Then, aim at the Boko and charge a Skyward Strike. After being well positioned, we then wait till he attacks and then launch the strike. And if well positioned, this will hit the cube and therefore, after the little cutscene, it will bring us up on the top of the hill, meaning we have skipped a large part of the deep woods. After that, we can jump off on the left side of that hill right there to skip the fight text and enter the dungeon and get on with the run. So earlier I talked about the concept of the BitWarp, and so I wanted to use this mode to provide a little explanation on what this and what the Reverse BitWarp are in a bit more details. When it comes to the BitWarp, the action is that you save in the world, which therefore records the current coordinates on the map. When you then get into back in time and proceed to save and load at the same time, what happens is that you will indeed load back into the map where you had originally saved. However, with the fact that the save is happening at the same time, it will therefore apply the new coordinates from the bit save onto the map you are loading into, meaning that you therefore load into a completely different area of the map. It basically means that it is about taking the back in time coordinates and applying them onto the game map. But what about Reverse BitWarp? While the normal BitWarp relies on the coordinates in back in time when you load back into the game, this time the Reverse BitWarp applies the coordinates from the save in the game itself instead of back in time. In the case of the Reverse BitWarp, done in the Fire Sanctuary to get to the Ancient Cistern, this is hence why the positioning when saving on that bird statue are precise, because when you are later on in back in time and enter the Ancient Cistern, and then load back into the file, the game will check at which coordinates to load into, in which case it will see the coordinates of the Fire Sanctuary save, and therefore, if done correctly, drop you at the right spot. For this, I would most definitely recommend checking out the tutorial that Zelkis made about it, that explains some good and reliable visual cues you may use to know whether you should be in a good position or not, as well as the setup as a whole. Next up, I would like to briefly talk about the Song of the Hero skip section of the run. The reason why is because it is a trick that is absolutely vital to get right in the run, as it is probably one of the most impactful RBMs that is done. For the Skyloft section, it is important that file 1 is selected as we open the bird statue menu, and only after it is open, then do we open up file 2 to bit save it, after which we go to Farron. In that case, we enter the back area with file 2, and we do not open the splash screen until we actually talk to the statue, in which case we then open file 1, then save and quit, and while that happens, open file 2, then quit once that is done. And then we go into the Farron Woods themselves with file 2. Very important, as it will mean that the game will think it is the first time you go into the woods, therefore triggering the fight cutscene, which you need to perform the RBM itself. Speaking of the RBM itself, performed by pressing start and then Z and 2 at the same time, we have to consider its timing carefully. A rule of thumb is that it is usually good to press Z and 2 once the file selection sound effect is over. That is because if it is done too early, the RBM won't take effect. Here, let me show you an example with this. Normally, the committing of this RBM is done with Vi talking to Link right after this cutscene. However, let's talk about the case where we unfortunately fail this RBM. You just reached the past, got the true Master Sword, and go to the door to the Sealed Valley, but we can't open it. Well, in most cases, we should just press the reset button in that case, but let's assume we are in a no reset kind of situation. The first thing we do is save at this bird statue and proceed to die in order to go back in time. From there on, we perform the Song of the Hero skip as normal, hopefully getting it right this time around. The only difference is that after the RBM is performed, it will need to be committed differently, for instance by using the slingshot on that plate above the door to the Seal Temple. If done well, this time around we can then just come back to Hylia's temple and attempt to open the door again and see if it works. Something else I would like to talk about is the Koloktos Boss Fight. And if we want to beat him fast, there definitely are strats we need to be wary of so that it goes well. The fight has two phases. What needs to be done is a one-cycle fight for both phases. For phase 1, 2 bombs as well as enough health to handle that, so at least 3 hearts should be good. First, do the first part of the phase as would be done casually. Once the first 2 arms are taken care of, place yourself so he starts his attack where you will plunge onto the ground. During that moment, we use the whip on him, which is quite oddly enough gonna make things favorable on our side. Once his arms are on the ground, we then pull them off and then rush to Koloktos, place 2 bombs while he is stunned and spin attack to make them explode, which should do enough damage to pass directly to phase 2 of the fight. So the reason why we would want to hit him with a whip is, as I said, because it puts things on our side. But what does that mean? Well, if this isn't done, there is a high likelihood that Koloktos will just put his blades in front of his core before the bombs explode, meaning that there won't be any damage. But by doing that whip attack at that point, for whatever reason, the likelihood of it happening so quickly are lowered, therefore leaving more time to place the bombs and make them explode. Now onto the second phase of Koloktos, which luckily is much more simple. As will be done casually, we wait till he attacks and has his arms on the ground, in which case we then grab the swords with the whip. After that, we attack him so he is stunned and open up the metal crate to his core. However, once that is open, this is where things differ. We here have to drop the giant sword, and here we charge our sword with the Skyward strike and attack Koloktos with it. We do that a first time, and then a second time, and he should be dead. When doing that, it is important to make sure that only the Skyward strike hits the Koloktos so the damage is well done. If the sword itself touches Koloktos when doing the strike, the damage done will be the damage of the sword and not of the Skyward strike, the latter being quite higher than of the former. Next up, I also wanted to talk about the setup for the Imprisoned 2 RBM. Mainly, what needs to be done after landing in Farron in Back in Time. On paper, it is just bit saving on that statue with file 1, then entering the Seal Temple and charging the Skyward strike with file 1, which will start a conversation with Impa from which the RBM is then performed. However, there are a few things to consider. Firstly, getting to the temple itself. If getting too close to the door at this point in the Back in Time, there is a risk the game may actually crash. So what we do in that situation is that we actually press Z right after jumping and stay pressed until we are inside the temple, which should prevent the game from crashing. Another to consider is that we need to have file 3 open in order to open the door, but it is necessary to then select file 1 before getting into the loading zone, since we want to be the proper Sealed Temple layer that is on that file for the RBM. Once inside, we open up the splash menu, charge the Skyward strike, place ourselves in front of the Door of Time, and then as we have Z pressed again, we select file 1 to start that conversation. After which we just wait until we can hear Bruce opening the door to go out, and we then start the file, which should lead us to right before the Imprisoned 2 fight, which we can now do. But now, what should be done in case it is failed? In that case, in normal gameplay, we should just do what we would do in Back in Time, without having to worry about crashing the game, for instance. We go inside Seal Temple and charge the Skyward strike, leading Impa to talk to Link, since Imprisoned 2 is now active. We watch the full cutscene and go outside. Then, watch another with Bruce talking to Link, and finally then can we go down and face the demon. It's obviously rather slow compared to doing this via RBM, but it is good to know that there is an alternate solution if one were to be stuck at that moment in the context of no reset run. In fact, this method is actually what is used in one of the newer routes that's recently been developed. I also wanted to talk a bit about the Imprisoned 2 fight itself. It is usually considered to be one of the most frustrating bosses in the run, and for good reason. Beating him relies on being able to stay on the Imprisoned's head every time a cycle is done, i.e. twice in a row and then a final hit. It is achieved by going up on his head and getting the first 2 hits by doing a vertical spin attack, then going slightly backwards, doing a forward hop and then a slash with the sword. If the positioning and timing was correct, this means that the game won't consider that Link actually is on the Imprisoned's head when it tries to throw him, since he was still in midair when the seal was pushed in. It is easy to choke this moment, as there is usually very little time to achieve this before he tries to throw Link off his head. Doing it once in itself can be pretty stressful, but doing it second time in a row can also be quite scary when not used to it, but it does come eventually. For the third part of the fight, the goal is to just push the seal with the 3 hits as quickly as possible. Now of course, if we do fall off, there are a few things that can be done to help. For instance, if we decide to use gurus to help us with the Imprisoned, we can actually gain some time by pressing B as soon as we launch a bomb towards him, which gives us an extra few seconds to move around and position Link wherever needed, instead of watching the animation of the bomb being launched. This definitely can help if we struggle on getting on the Imprisoned himself due to his movement. In terms of the last few things I would like to talk about, that would include the final fight against Ghirahim, as there are quite a few ways to make that fight fast, which all are pretty simple but do require being known. For the first phase of that fight, it saves a few seconds to jump off the platform at the time as Ghirahim is falling, so that you already are next to him for the final blow you have to perform on him. In general, when trying to get him off the platform, going up and down is the best way to go, though we still have to be careful about him blocking attacks occasionally, of course. When it comes to the second phase of the fight, it is definitely possible to do it without a shield. To do so, we have to first hit him once with the sword, and then do a spin attack in the same direction as initially hit, which will therefore knock his sword off, allowing us to go for the direct hit on the chest crystal on Ghirahim. And for the final phase of that fight, when he's got that massive sword, it is quite similar, where once we perform the first hit, we then do a spin attack on the side of the sword that was hit on our first attack, and we should be able to attack Ghirahim. Finally, he is defeated. Finally, I would like to talk briefly about Demise. Something I definitely recommend when being a beginner is to have the shield ready. While there definitely are shieldless strats, having it will definitely be making it safer. I would definitely recommend checking out the DSR page about it, since it talks precisely of the methods that may be used to kill him, but when it comes to beating Demise with the shield in hand, the first phase is relatively simple. We usually want to constantly be doing hits, which we do by first having him block the attack and then hitting on the opposite sides, with spin attacks even, which should give opportunities for many hits. When Demise is about to attack, this is when we can use the shield to block his sword. As I said, this first phase is simple with the shield. Where things get scary is in the second phase of the fight. With Demise now having an electric attack at first within his sword, the damage will be very high if Link gets hit, and if already at low health, this will certainly mean death. Luckily, with the shield, there is indeed a pretty consistent method that really helps with this. We approach him and protect ourselves for the first 3 hits he does with the help of the shield. Once he gets into this particular position on his 4th attack, this is when we can then freely attack him with the sword and stun him on the floor. Since it is impossible to finish the final blow on first try, we instead raise our sword in the air so the Master Sword can take in a thunder and be charged. We wait till Demise gets up and we then throw the electric arc at him, which will stun him, in which case we then attack him, and as soon as he gets on the floor, very quickly go for the final blow. Most of the problems, especially when it comes to the second phase, come when Demise decides to change his pattern of attacks. It is rare, but it does happen. If it does, the best bet is to always be ready to protect yourself with your shield and to try and avoid the attacks. Once you recognize the attacks from the correct pattern, it is then possible to get back to how it should be. The other risk that may happen is that if we wait even slightly too long to perform the final blow of Demise at the end of the battle, he will actually manage to roll on the side, which can be very dangerous, especially if he charges his sword with a lightning strike before we can. That is why it is important to go for the final blow as soon as the prompt appears, to make sure that the hit is not missed. Now that we've talked about all that, let's move on to the next section of this video. Now let's talk about the marathon safety for Skyward Sword 80%. It is important to think about it as it is not only quite a long run on its own, though not as long as it used to be, but also it being the second last of a run of the challenge means that the stakes are only getting higher. The first thing to mention when it comes to that is regarding the actual route being used. At the moment that I am writing this, the fastest route for Skyloft actually isn't considered safe for marathons, as it uses a pretty much frame-perfect trick a few minutes in for a cutscene skip that, if failed, basically kills the run. This is why the route I talked about in the first section of the video is the marathon safe route that does not require this trick. It adds a bit of time, but it is definitely worth doing in the context of the 3D Zelda challenge. Anyhow, there is one advantage that plays heavily in Skyward Sword's favor, which is the fact that every single back in time performed in the run relies on saving the game. So by definition, there always is a point you can come back to in theory, for instance if the game were to crash, and to retry again if needed. Likewise, if an RBM is failed, for instance, for most of them it is as simple as retrying it that should fix the problems. There definitely are a few key areas to be careful about when it comes to the safety though. For instance, it's been discussed in this video that it is important to get the Elden Early Pillar in File 2 correctly, and while it is possible to try it again, it isn't the case once the Earth Temple is done. It is vital, once again, due to the Farron back in time. That is why something that can be done to check when it is performed is to take a few seconds to look up and see if the pillar can be seen in File 2 before saving and quitting to load back into File 1. It takes a few seconds, but it is definitely worth it since we can then be sure of whether it worked or not. Likewise, another moment in the run that can be quite tricky is for instance the reverse BitWarp to the Ancient Cistern, on quite a few levels in fact, because if we manage to get past the initial warp, it can definitely be recommended to do a safety save once arriving at the dungeon itself to ensure that if anything goes wrong, at least we go back to that point. Likewise, it is definitely recommended to save prior to the Koloktos Boss Fight. The most important part in Skyward Sword speedrunning is to at least have a basic understanding of what it is that we're doing within back in time, instead of just blindly following the route. This means that understanding why errors happen is easier, and therefore it becomes easier to avoid the potential issues that can arise in the run, such as crashing, early life tree seed, and other shenanigans. To therefore conclude on this section, it can therefore be said that Skyward Sword 80% remains relatively safe for a marathon run, but it isn't risk-free. There usually are backup methods for problems that may arise, and the fact that this is a run with frequent saving helps a lot with that. Knowledge about the game and back in time can also be a huge help, even on the basic level. The idea is, if there is a problem in the run, chances are there is a way around the issue by usually restarting the back in time, and as long as some of the bigger RBMs are done well, such as the Elden Early Pillar or the ones that activate bird statues in other areas of the map, then the run should mostly be fine. Phew! Now we're now done with this super long video about Skyward Sword 80%. While this video and series as a whole is no tutorial, I do hope that the tips and links I have provided can potentially help new people getting into the category. There is a lot to do with Skyward Sword, and the community is always there to help if needed. In any case, this video is a bit special, because it completely has changed my original 3D Zelda challenge plans. Due to that, the plans I had with the challenge had to be put on hold, as I had to focus on this game particularly for the time being. However, with that said, once the marathon is over, it will be time to move on. And honestly, I can be pretty sure that my next step for the 3D Zelda challenge will be either The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask 80% or The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker 80%. I am sure that this is going to be a blast. As usual, remember that I will also be learning those categories over on my Twitch channel when I start doing so, as well as other speedruns, many times, or even casual games. Thank you for being here, and see you soon. Bye!